No matter where you look in media today, you will see the English language. It is in our movies, the internet, on signs all over the world. It is the lingua franca of tourism. Many modern languages, including German, Korean, and Japanese, actively import English words for objects and ideas, rather than developing their own. One of the few global languages that has resisted major English influence is French, and that is because they set up an institution, the Commission Générale de Terminologie et de Néologie, specifically to combat just that. But why? How do languages become so important? Why English? And what does this mean for the people who do not grow up speaking it? Now, before we truly start, I'm just going to say preemptively that David Bellos' book, Is That a Fish in Your Ear? The Amazing Adventure of Translation, was a major source of research for this video. Unless specified, if I give a statistic or fact, it's probably from that book, so go check it out. Throughout the world, there are around 7,000 languages spoken by various peoples and ethnicities. Building dedicated and well-run institutions to translate between each and every one of these languages is impossible. Therefore, throughout much of history, different languages have served as vehicular languages, languages that allow for various ethnicities in a given region to communicate in a shared tongue. The people of Russia speak a wide variety of Slavic, Turkic, and Finno-Ugric languages, but it would be rare to find someone who does not also speak Russian. Likewise, there are 22 chartered languages in India, but the people there are often trilingual, and one of those languages they speak will almost always be from a smaller list of Hindi, Urdu, Tamil, and English. In a way, Rome is a precursor to this. The Roman Empire imposed Latin on their conquered lands, and never bothered with learning the native languages, causing the decline of languages such as Etruscan, Umbrian, and many Celtic languages of Britain and France. Later, the British would enter the world sphere with their own empire, and not only would they spread the English language to Africa and Asia, but they would set up 2 entire continents that would speak primarily their language. The main vehicular languages of Europe, and the colonies that were influenced by it, have waxed and waned in prestige over time. French used to be the language of the Russian aristocracy. Latin, despite having no native speakers, was the intermediate language through which all science and the Bible were translated. But prestige can be lost. After the decline of Latin, German was for a while the language of science. Then, World War II happened, and the wider world shunned the language out of embarrassment. Any remaining German scientists were hired by America, where they continued to work in English. Likewise, Russian, which had been an important language of science since Dmitry Mendeleev devised the periodic table, lost its own prestige after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War. Now, nearly every new scientific journal, whether it's published in Berlin, Moscow, or Tokyo, is published in English, or with the handy translation available soon after. It's the only way for a scientist to get their paper worldwide recognition. As Bellos puts it, what we seem to have experienced is not a process of language imposition, but language elimination. And so, English currently reigns at the top. It's not the only high-level vehicular language. Mandarin Chinese and Cantonese also command a large population of L2 speakers across Asia. But in terms of global reach, English is second to none. And a particular problem arises with prestige languages. Native L1 speakers of that language usually do not bother to learn a second language. A speaker of a language with less prestige, such as Greek, would need to learn a second language if they wanted to seek better employment in any other country, like Germany or France. But for an English speaker, that is not a requirement. You could potentially have a career in any large European country and not speak any language other than English. For English L1s, foreign language is not a necessity, it's a specialization. My own education reflects this. As I went over in my video, Language Laziness, I have lived in 4 English-speaking countries, and the language education in all 4 was abysmal. The only way to satisfactorily learn a foreign language through the UK education system would be to take it to A-level or university level, much higher level courses, and much later in life than a child in Switzerland would begin learning a second language by law. As a result, all the progress I've made learning languages myself has been self-taught. An unsurprising consequence of this is the lack of interest in the culture of others. Learning a foreign language involves learning about the culture that language came from, of the country, its people, and their history. The fact that so many people in the US and UK never learn a second language, and so learn very little about cultures outside of their own, leads to a general antipathy towards other cultures. Notice how a lot of American media, especially concerning countries such as Japan, is extremely surface level in its depictions of foreign countries. The people have little interest in the actual history of the place, and the media caters to that by feeding them easily digestible stereotypes. Following from this antipathy, English as a language and cultural institution is startlingly lazy. Whereas a translator living in Berlin or Tokyo can make an easy career of translating into their own language, literary and entertainment translators in Britain are paid so little they have to keep it as a side hustle, a passion project. Furthermore, this lack of funding means that very few languages are actually translated into English. As Bellos writes, few native writers of English are fluent readers of Tamil, Tagalog, Farsi, or Wolof. Fewer wish to devote their time to translation. For writers of these and most other languages of the world, the only way to get an international hearing is to put the work into a world language learned at school. Indeed, some have already had the idea to simply abandon writing in their native language altogether. An editorialist for the Japanese newspaper Yomiuri Shimbun once wrote, "However great our future writers may be, their fame will never succeed in crossing beyond our borders. It is self-evident that a man with great ambitions should study English writing." English in publishing has become the worldwide language of prestige. Any author looking for a worldwide reach must be published in English, regardless of the language they themselves write in. But as seen in figures from the year 2000 to 2009, far fewer books are translated into English than are translated from English. There is competition to be translated into English, and the route has a very specific pivot. The fact is that most publishing scouts in the UK and America don't speak a foreign language other than French. If an Albanian author wants their book translated into English to reach the global market, they must first get it translated into French, and then hope it is noticed by UK publishing scouts. Even then, the English translation would be done off of the French version rather than the original Albanian. Watchers of this channel will have seen an example of this before. In my video on translation, I note that for the Estonian novel Mes Kestiades Usisonu by Andrus Kivirak, the English translation, The Man Who Spoke Snakish, is based off of the French version, rather than the original Estonian. Curiously though, the German translation, Der Mann der mit Schlangensprach, is based off of the original Estonian. Bellos notes that the German language is often a gateway for Estonian authors in translation, such as Jan Kross, author of The Tsar's Madman. But for English, the French translation as a base reigns supreme. That Albanian author I mentioned is not hypothetical. David Bellos himself is the translator of several of Albanian author Ismail Kadari's works, all based on the French versions. Curiously though, this works in Bellos' favor, because Kadari himself doesn't speak any English, but does speak French, so Bellos was able to personally consult the author while translating his work. For the effects of this English language domination, let's look at the state of a language many of you probably don't think often about: Icelandic. Icelandic is a linguistically conservative language. As Jon Henley of The Guardian writes, unlike most languages, when Icelandic needs a new word, it rarely imports one. Instead, enthusiasts coin a new term rooted in the tongue's ancient Norse past, a neologism that looks, sounds, and behaves like Icelandic. The Icelandic word for computer, for example, is tolva, a marriage of tala, which means number, and volva, prophetess. A web browser is vafri, derived from the verb to wander. Podcast is hlaðvarp, something you charge and throw. You might think that Icelandic's conservative nature would make it resistant to loss of prestige, as it is not changed by foreign influence. But the small speaking base of Icelandic, limited almost entirely to Iceland, spells its doom. Icelandic is only spoken by around 360,000 people. As such, very few international services see the need to cater for a language with such few speakers. Siri and Alexa aren't available in Icelandic. They had developed their own software, Embla. As Eiríkur Ragnvaldsson, a professor of Icelandic language and linguistics at the University of Iceland, puts it, it's called digital minoritization, when a majority language in the real world becomes a minority language in the digital world. Because young Icelanders in particular now spend such a large part of their lives in an almost entirely English digital world, said Eiríkur, they are no longer getting the input they need to build a strong base in the grammar and vocabulary of their native tongue. We may actually be seeing a generation growing up without a proper mother tongue. Indeed, secondary school teachers already report 15-year-olds holding whole playground conversations in English. And it's not surprising. The number one way of engaging with media in the developed world is through the internet, and the majority of media on the internet is in English. Languages are mainly useful for active communication. A German could theoretically use their language to communicate with people in Austria, Switzerland, Belgium, and Liechtenstein. Meanwhile, someone from France has much of Africa available to talk to. But for a child or teen in Iceland, the only way to communicate with the wider world is with something other than their native language. And the obvious choice is English. But Icelandic is not alone in this. In a study by the Multilingual Europe Technology Alliance, at least 21 European languages are at risk of digital extinction, the highest risking among these being languages such as Latvian, Lithuanian, Maltese, and Basque. These are languages confined to small geographic areas with low numbers of native speakers. Even a YouTuber or a media creator who wants to shift away from an American-centric media sphere must still capitulate to their audience by making content in English, lest they cut their potential viewer count by a factor of 10. But as much as I have talked of the effect of English over time, and as much as the consequences of English dominance may seem inescapable, remember that this is not unique. Latin once seemed an inescapable standard for international communication. So did French, Russian, Spanish, and Latin America. Language is an ever-fluctuating construct. The amount it has changed in the last 100 years will seem archaic in 50 years' time. David Bellos sums it up best. There is no greater likelihood of all languages being gobbled up by English than of the Amazon and the Volga flowing into the same sea. The primordial mechanism of linguistic differentiation makes English no less a tool for marking difference than any other tongue. Well, that's the end of the video. I'd like to thank each and every one of you who made it this far. Please remember to like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell, and learn Icelandic.